Hello, and welcome to ELPC Thinks. My name is Kevin Brubaker, and I'm Deputy Director and lead of the Transportation Program here at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. ELPC Thinks is a webinar series where we bring together experts, authors, environmental and civic leaders together to forge new strategies for progress. A quick heads up, we'll be recording this webinar and live streaming on Facebook to share it with those who aren't able to join us live on Zoom. If you'd like to ask questions at any time, click the Q&A icon on your screen and type in your question. We'll also have the chat open for reactions and commentaries as well. But try to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. Today, we're joined by Illinois State Senator Ram Villivalam, who was recently named Majority Whip and serves as chair of the Transportation Committee. We're also joined by Audrey Wennink, Senior Director at the Metropolitan Planning Council, who leads that sister organization's transportation work. Our topic today, saving public transit in Chicago. Before we get to our guests though, I want to set the stage a little bit and explain why this is even a topic that ELPC is talking about. Let me briefly share two slides with you. First, transportation is the leading source of climate change pollution, and most of that comes from people driving cars. While other sectors are getting cleaner, transportation emissions continue to grow. On average, taking the CTA results in about 60% less carbon pollution than driving a car by yourself. And on the margins, it eliminates all your carbon pollution, since you're just one more passenger on a bus or train that was already traveling. The more people take transit, the more efficient it gets. Second, public transportation supports green communities. Dense urban dwellers produce far less carbon than their suburban and rural counterparts. They're close by to many necessities like corner stores, pharmacies, and schools, which may be a long drive away in more spread out communities. Urban residents not only drive less, but live in smaller homes and apartments that are more efficient to heat and cool. A Chicago resident generates less than half the carbon pollution of a resident in Will County, for example. So as RTA Chairman Kurt Dillard says, if you care about the environment, the thing you can do that makes the most immediate impact is to take public transit. But that transit is threatened right now. So let's dive into this a little bit, talk about what the problems are with public transit in Chicago and what we might do to solve them. The senator is not yet with us, so let's start with Audrey. Help set the stage a little bit. What's the problem? What do we need to do about it? Then we'll be joined by the senator in a few minutes. Audrey?
Thanks, Kevin. I'm just popping up my slides here. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here today and have this conversation. As Kevin said, I'm with the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that does urban planning and policy research and advocacy. And we are part of a coalition called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, as is ELPC. This coalition involves 200 grassroots policy, environmental, community-based, and state and national environmental organizations that are advocating for a package of bills that link transportation and the climate. And we know that our region was built around transit, and this is a huge part of the culture and experience of living in our region. One statistic that I find really compelling is that in a recent survey conducted by Realtor magazine, 65% of home builders said having public transit nearby was very or somewhat important. So buyers will pay more to live in communities that have transit, and this is what people want. However, transit service is struggling to meet rider needs. We're at a critical turning point. Transit's not working for a lot of people. We have less service today than we did in 2007. Our problems started before COVID, but were exacerbated during the pandemic. We also have an operations funding crisis bearing down on us, and action will be required to deal with this issue in this legislative session. And we also have transit agencies operating in a structure that was developed 40 years ago that is not able to address current rider needs. Because we're not getting people back on transit as quickly as we want to, we're experiencing worse traffic congestion than the worst traffic congestion we've had in a long time. And transit's affecting the quality of life of both people who ride it and people who don't. Transit is essential. A lot of people depend on it. Did you know that in Chicago, more than a quarter of households have no cars? So they really depend on transit. And even if you look at the suburbs and the collar counties, about 1 in 20 households has no cars, or there may be multiple people in a household sharing one vehicle. Our transit system allows people to live car-free or car-light. Some people are choosing this for environmental and lifestyle reasons, but there are also a lot of people who cannot afford a car or have a disability and cannot drive. Transit makes our region more equitable and more resilient. And people want to live in places where they have choices, where they have affordable transportation. But we are having some problems. Like other large cities, our transit ridership cratered during COVID, but most other large city systems are evolving and regaining ridership much faster than we are. So this is a data set by the American Public Transportation Association showing the large city transit systems. And you can see in New York and DC, they're almost up at 100%, almost fully recovered to 2019 levels of ridership. But CTA is under 70%. So why is this happening? We have to ask ourselves that question. So let me talk for a moment about who's in charge of our transit agencies. This spaghetti bowl image is not modern art. This is a representation of all the appointments to the 4 transit boards in our region: the RTA, the CTA, Metro, and PACE. The RTA is supposed to provide regional oversight. And then we have PACE, CTA, and Metro with each with their own separate boards of directors. There are 47 board appointments in this region. But I think we're seeing that if everyone is accountable, in a sense, nobody's accountable. Each of these agencies develops its separate budget each year and is competing for riders against the other agencies because the system was designed for that. It was made in a different time, 40 years ago, by different people, but we can change the system to make it work for our current conditions. In fact, right now, both CTA and PACE are doing strategic bus plans at the same time, and they're even using the same consultant. This is just an example of the independent planning that is going on all the time. There's actually no forum where the 3 transit agencies come together and do proactive planning. They each lead their own plans, and they might invite a few staff from the other agencies to attend. But even RTA acknowledges that the transit service boards set fare levels and policies independently. They set service goals independently. They select capital projects independently. And the decisions on which projects get funded are not decided at a regional level. So the real question is, how does governance affect the rider experience? These board appointments matter. For example, let's remember that in 1983, there was a lot of animosity between conservative suburban leaders and the city of Chicago, and the leadership was purposely skewed. So we have Metro with 30% of its stations in the city, and only 1 out of 10 board members is from Chicago, is in a Chicago appointment. It's no surprise then that the Metro stations in the city of Chicago are some of the most neglected. There are areas of the city that have no CTA rail, but they do have Metro, but no one even knows where the station is because it's so hard to find. We have a similar situation with PACE. PACE has only 1 appointment representing the city of Chicago, despite the fact that it runs lots of service in the city of Chicago, and 70% of the paratransit that it runs is in the city of Chicago. And these are structural issues that were set up in 1983. While governance can seem a little abstract, who is in charge matters. In fact, 4 of 10, in the past 10 years, there have been 4 separate reports recommending major governance changes to deliver better transit service at the regional level. And the last one on this list references the plan of action for regional transit that was developed by the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. They developed a plan in 2023 because the General Assembly asked them to. They asked them to recommend solutions, and they did a fantastic job. We've put a link in the chat to this report. They also recommended increased unification of governance to deliver better regional transit service. Governance reform is needed to give riders what they need. We hear over and over that riders want integrated regional fares, timed connections between services. They do not want to arrive on their metro train and see the Pace bus pull away. How can we make sure that everything works seamlessly for the rider? They want coordinated information. They just want to get around the region. And they definitely want to feel safe and feel like there's good customer service. But before I get into the details of the state legislation to address these issues, I want to share with you how dramatic the funding problem is that we are facing. CMAP forecasts that we would need to cut 20 to 40% of the service if we do not raise additional operations funding. The whole region would face drastic cuts. MPC has developed the maps on this slide, and this is just meant to be an illustration of what the scenario could look like. But you can see on the left side, this is the system we have right now in terms of buses. On the right side, if 20% of CTA routes were cut and 40% of PACE routes were cut based on their productivity, based on those that have the most riders, the map would show a lot of routes being cut. And if this were really to happen, it wouldn't look exactly like this, but this gives you a sense of what we're facing.
Audrey, on that
Yes.
slide, is that red showing bus lines you suggest you think might be eliminated or service would be cut back?
Eliminated.
Wow.
Yeah. That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
It's one slide for a second so people can digest that.
Right.
So
I mean, there's
service on those red routes potentially.
Right.
Thanks. Go ahead. Didn't mean to.
No problem. And if you took a similar approach to rail, again, this is just an illustration, but entire lines could be shut down. MPC took a similar approach where you looked at the least productive routes in terms of the numbers of riders. And you can see in red, the rail lines, both Metro and CTA. I know it's a little hard to see on this slide, but my colleague Hugo will drop a link into the chat that will show that you can go into a blog and go into these maps and toggle them yourself and take a closer look. I mean, the bottom line is not exactly what's in the maps. It's really just to get the sense of how dramatic this would be. But we don't have to have that happen to us. There's another way. The riders want the things on this slide. And if we all work together to raise the funding that is needed and actually more funding to increase service, we can deliver the transit future that riders want. We can offer better security. We can offer regional rail where there are metro trains operating in the middle of the day and they come more frequently than every 2 hours. People want bus and train service on the weekends and on the middle of the day because they're using transit now, not only to go to work, but for recreation and shopping and to visit friends. People want suburban buses to be more frequent, and PACE is developing some awesome pulse routes. They're shown in this map on purple at the top. 2 that are already running on Dempster and Milwaukee. And then there are other purple PACE routes planned throughout the region, like on South Halsted Street, in the city and in the suburbs, at 95th Street, partly in the city, partly in the suburbs. Those things can get up and running faster. Lastly, I'll mention that suburban communities have done a great job developing demand response services like Ride and Cane, Ride DuPage, McRide. These are county level demand response services, largely for people with disabilities and seniors, but they have a lot of challenges in terms of eligibility and the boundaries that they are operating in. And with a regional lens, these services could be much more integrated and could work a lot better for people. Additionally, the frequency of all the service that we have on the street and on the rails could increase so that people could get to a place where they don't even have to check the schedule, where they can just walk up and know that a bus or train is going to come sooner. And that's really the ideal state. So raising 1.5 billion in new operations funding can get us much closer to that. So now let's get into a little bit of the details of what a legislative proposal could look like. As I mentioned, legislators asked for the analysis developed by CMAP. And now they're taking that counsel and trying to make it real, to operationalize it via meaningful reforms. So the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act was just reintroduced in the state Senate by Senator Villivalam, and we'll get to his remarks in just a moment. We're glad to have him here. He's really a champion of this transit reform. This, as I noted, this was informed by CMAP, and a lot of civic organizations have been involved. This bill would unify the transit agencies into one regional metropolitan mobility authority. It would offer increased transparency and requirements for the directors that would lead the agency. The top priority is getting board members to think regionally rather than as representatives from geographic subregions. It would require that transit fares would be fully integrated once and for all. And it would improve accountability, adding some additional oversight in terms of inspector general for the agency and regular performance audits. And finally, it will save us money. No longer will we have 4 sets of lobbyists in Springfield competing against each other, or 4 procurement offices. So I have a few slides here that would just get into a few more details. We really need to get our service oriented to what riders need. And the proposal would create a citizens advisory board with a seat on the board of directors, so there'd be a much closer relationship between the rider needs and the leaders of the agency. One of the major provisions would be it would require creation of a regional transit service plan so that we could all know where service will be, when it's going to come, what hours of the day. And right now, we actually have a static funding formulas that we've had for 40 years. PACE, Metro, and CTA get a fixed percentage of regional transit dollars, and they have to work with that. They're not based on an analysis of the service that people need, but old political agreements. What we really need to do is flip that and determine what service we need and then fund it. Right now, it's backwards. In terms of leadership, the directors would be needing to have experience, like on large capital projects or urban planning or transit or labor relations. The public could nominate directors or weigh in on director appointments. There would be reporting on how often directors use transit. So we would have a better sense of if our leaders are actually using the system and learning about the system. The MMA would authorize automated enforcement of bus lanes. We know that's a huge problem. We know riders want to feel safe, and advocates have been asking for a transit ambassador program. So there's a greater employee presence and customer service orientation. So this bill would institutionalize that. And we know that for more people to ride transit, they need to live and work and have other destinations near transit. So we would support and incentivize that via the creation of a statewide equitable transit development office. And then lastly, we need to make sure that IDOT has more capabilities at planning transit on roadways and have the right staff to do that. And this is my last slide here, talking about fares. There's a lot we can do with fare innovation. But with 3 separate agencies setting their own fare policies, this is not happening. We could be doing things like establishing a policy that allows people to pay as they go. That's what fare capping does. And once they've paid enough individual fares to add up to a weekly or monthly pass, then they would ride free for the rest of the time. Or an income-based fare program. Right now, we only have income qualified fares for people with disabilities and seniors. We don't have it for the general population. So there's a lot to be excited about if we create a new unified agency that can be more innovative and responsive to rider needs. So what we really feel is that now's the time, and now's really a turning point. And if we combine both governance reform and funding reform, we can have the transit system of the future. So I'll stop
Audrey,
there.
Audrey, thank you so much. Senator, are you with us? I don't see you on screen. There you are. Senator Villivalam, welcome. Thank you for being here. Audrey, could you turn off your slides so we can see
Yep.
this? Senator Audrey's laid out a lot of the detail about the problems. Give us the Springfield perspective on all of this.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for that kind introduction. And Audrey, as per usual, your thorough overview and fierce advocacy for what we're fighting for, which is, you know, a once in a generation opportunity to change public transit, you know, as we know it. So as was mentioned, I'm Ron Villivalam, State Senator for the 8th District, Chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. Thank you, and again, apologies for being a little tardy here. I've been working with my son to make sure he doesn't get any more tardies this quarter. So I have my
CTA for being late.
There you go. But I also have to work on my tardies as well. But it's was running from another meeting. You know, I think from a policy perspective and kind of some of the dynamics Audrey laid out really well. We are, you know, this is you know, the third year of working on this. It's you know, to put simply, right, which it's not simple, but obviously every major public transit system in the nation is facing a fiscal cliff due to the expedited loss of ridership because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we find ourselves in that situation. And you know, we've as the Illinois Senate held 6 committee hearings with over 25 hours of testimony across the state, from the city of Chicago to the suburbs of Cook County, the collar counties, and even one in Springfield. We have over 55 public transit agencies in Springfield, I'm sorry, in Illinois. And we held the one in Springfield because there are 52 other public transit agencies that are not facing the decline ridership, but also have needs as well. And that speaks to the whole, you know, approach that we're trying to take here. This issue has not been touched very significantly since 2007, 2008, and then prior to that, since 1982. And so we're looking at this as a once in a generation opportunity. And I always start with the 3 buckets: service, governance, and funding. We need to ensure that we are obtaining the level of service that our residents want, need, and deserve. And if you think about the buckets of people we're discussing, right, we're talking about people that have never used public transit as one bucket, the people that used it previously and may not use it anymore or may use it infrequently, and then those that still use it today. And across the board, right, we're trying to get everyone to utilize it, right? So how can we get that first bucket of people that don't use it to take a chance to ride it, get from point A to point B? How do we get those that use it previously to get back on and use it more frequently? And then how do we make sure it's working for the people that are continuing to use it today, right? You know, those are the people that for you know, for a fact, we know, right, that are trying to get to their job, their hospital, their doctor, their school, and they have no other mode of transportation. They're really reliant on public transit, and we need to make sure that it's working for them. So my opening is always, what level of service can we achieve? Can we improve on? Can we expand on? Can we be maintained, and so forth? And that leads us to, how do we hold that level of service and the systems in place accountable, right? And as Audrey mentioned, we have 4 different agencies, 21 authorities appointing 47 different people. No other public transit system in the world has this kind of governance model, right? And why is this important? Well, one, it's too important for the residents we represent, right? They rely on public transit and they want it to be safe, reliable, accessible, environmentally conscious, economically impactful. And so and that's why we're doing all of this, right? Number one. Number two, the reality of the situation is after we have this conversation in Springfield, um, I'm an Illinois state senator. I represent 217,000 people. I work on 100 different issues. I will not be sitting in the RTA office asking them what they're doing every day, right? That's why we need a governance system that holds, that we believe, that we trust as state legislators that are going to take action, that system will hold the service and the agencies accountable, right? And so that's why the governance uh, conversation is incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And so that's why that's happening. And I've told everyone we need to work on service and understand what that looks like and get the governance to the place that we needed to get to before we can talk about funding. And absolutely, I'm someone that is going to be the fiercest advocate for funding, not just what is being characterized as the budget gap, right? Initially 730 million, now 771. The reality, and I've told all this to my colleagues, is I don't want to just fund the budget gap, right? That's the most widely discussed number, but we've been told, and it's been corroborated by some of the advocates as well, that that will just cover the gap to provide the service we have today. And I think that if you ask any rider or any resident, they are not satisfied with the service we have today. And so, if we really truly want to achieve the once in a generation opportunity that we have, take advantage of that and achieve a public transit system, not just for next year or 2030, but 2050, we're going to have to invest like we mean it and put our money where our mouth is. And that's why the number of 1.5 billion has been put out there as a transformational investment in the operations of our public transit system. I also want to add, though, this does not include funding for the capital needs of our public transit system. I've always said we can fund the Metro train, to operate. We also need to fund the maintenance and renovation of the Metro bridge that the train goes over. And that is where another funding conversation needs to be attached to the initial operations one to make sure we're not just investing in the operations, we're investing in the infrastructure. And so I think those three buckets is what we have before us. We introduced our legislation last May. We've introduced it again, Senate Bill 5. Easy to remember, doesn't have 4 or 5 digits. It's Senate Bill 5. And we're going to work hard to bring that to a committee hearing, hold a subject matter hearing, make sure that we put all of our cards on the table, discuss all of the challenges as Audrey talked about, the silos, the lack of integration, lack of coordination. And look, I've always said this too. We have very dedicated public servants in the CTA, Metro, PACE, and RTA. This is not a personal attack. This is simply a result of a design that takes place. I travel to Springfield. I'm going to Springfield today. My wife is here with the kids. Um, Sometimes I'm saying something in Springfield and she's saying something here. Things get lost in translation because we're in two different places, right? Usually it's my fault, by the way. But the point I'm trying to make is this. The structure we have is by design leads to the challenges that exist. And that's what we're trying to address. And so I just want to make that clear. We have great public servants in these agencies. However, the design, in my opinion, is flawed. And that's why we're taking this step. We also know that organized labor and some other stakeholders are going to introduce legislation. We know that there's going to be discussion on the funding formula. The split is currently approximately 58% to CTA, 34% to Metro, 8% to PACE. And from some reports, we've seen that the ridership is 80% from on CTA. And so there's a potential discussion on the formula, funding formula to the different operations. So it's going to be a robust conversation. And the way we're going to get this done, though, is I was checking by 143 of you contacting your state senators, your state reps, contacting your friends, family, neighbors to do the same. since we're on with the ELPC, I want to make this point very clear. I think that there's an opportunity to move forward on an idea, a concept, a funding concept like congestion pricing. It's been getting tough reports out of New York. I think it's largely because of the amount and largely because of the rollout. Why do I mention this? Because I strongly believe that one of the biggest drivers and passions of getting public transit right is creating a zero emissions fleet of CTA and PACE. Uh, that I think the numbers on that are in the billions to get that done, get that accomplished. And as a result of that, we're going to need a dedicated funding source for specifically that, endeavor. And so I think congestion pricing could be part of that. That's going to be difficult, but I think MPC has done an amazing job, put out a proposal, a $3 fee, a $5 fee that's digestible for someone driving in an SUV from the suburbs to the city. That's what our tolls are, quite frankly. It's not New York where it's $15 or $9 plus a bridge toll of $22. So I just want to put that out there because I'm speaking with you all specifically. We need your voice on this, on all of it. But I think specifically as it relates to zero emissions, that's where we really could hear if your voices could be the loudest on that. I think that's a great opportunity there. With that, I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. There's a lot of ideas to unpack. But let me start at sort of the biggest level, 4 different agencies. To me, sort of the poster child in what's wrong was a few years ago when PACE and Metra got together for the Fair Transit South Cook project. The idea there was the agencies were going to cooperate and increase service and reduce fares. And the city of Chicago's response, instead of embracing that and getting the CTA to work with them, the previous mayor's response was, well, they're going to steal riders from CTA. That's a bad thing. Classic case of transit agencies competing against each other instead of cooperating. How did we get to this spot? Why does Chicago have 4 different transit agencies? Audrey?
Yeah, it's really it's a historical relic. In the 1970s, our transit agencies were a lot of them were privately run. Then they started going bankrupt. Then the public sector took over and created a structure. And there were a lot of different personalities in the state legislature then. And there were some very conservative people that wanted to create a structure where they had control, and there was a lot of animosity between the suburbs and the city. And this is, we ended up with this on purpose. And it was a creation of the people that were in charge 40 years ago, but we're a very, very different context now. From everything from population trends to where jobs are, to where people are traveling, to the legislators that we have and the, people's perspectives. It's really, really different now.
Yeah.
Audrey hit it on the head. And I think, I think I said at one hearing, not to age myself, but someone that was testifying, one of the agency heads said, well, this was created this way for a reason in 1982, and it was well thought out and so forth. And I said, I said some comments in my head, and then I said some comments out loud. But I said, I wasn't born in 1982. And so the reality is there's never going to be a policy just across the board that we say, well, that was done in 1982, so we don't need to revisit it. We're good. Like that's to me an abdication of responsibility. And as Audrey mentioned, some dynamics, I would say, at least, in terms of elected officials and so forth, have changed. And some haven't, right? There's still the massive density in the city of Chicago, the level of need as it relates to seniors and people with disabilities, and really it's very challenging to be in a situation where you're just consistently hearing what I just said about how this was designed a certain way for so long. The reality is it's a disservice to the agencies themselves. CTA serves 35 suburbs. Metra has 80 stations in the city of Chicago. Pace does all of the paratransit. They took over all of the paratransit for the entire region. And so, when we talk about integration on paper, when we look at where the stations are, what suburbs are served by which entity, and who Pace doing paratransit across the region, it seems integrated. The reality, though, is we don't have one fare policy, and that's a byproduct of politics or competition, as you mentioned. We don't have one procurement process. We don't have the situation where we're able to pilot programs, whether it's free or reduced or otherwise, at one moment in one program. There's a number of examples, right, where there's an opportunity to work together to create what we're all trying to achieve, which is a seamless experience for the rider that improves ridership and for people's ability to get from point A to point B. And so that's a little bit how we got there, as Audrey mentioned, but a huge opportunity moving forward.
The RTA has been quite vocal in the last 2 or 3 weeks saying they can do this. They have been charged by the legislature to provide that coordination. Let them do their jobs. Why isn't that sufficient, Senator?
Well, for one reason or another, it hasn't happened. And so, we're in a situation now where there is an expectation, a request from Springfield to provide funding. And the reality is, I've always said this from the beginning, there will be no funding without reform. And we expect this of every agency, every industry, right? When they come to Springfield, we're not accustomed to requests. I think in my 5, 6 year, I'm going on my 6th year. There's only been one person that has come to Springfield and not made a request of the legislature. And I had to ask that person, "Are you okay? Like you're not asking for anything?" So we're accustomed to the request. Now I can count on my hands how many times a request of over $1 billion has been made, right? It's not often, very few times, right? So that's a huge ask and request. However, it's just not going to happen without reform, without accountability, without transparency. And that goes to the question you asked and the debate that exists, which is there's a lot of people that say RTA has the current authority to implement the procurement, the fare policy, and so forth. There's some that would say, well, RTA has these authorities, but the other agencies also has these authorities, and that's what's caused some confusion and so forth. I'm here to say, quite frankly, I don't care. I want it solved. And we're not going to come to a resolution on funding without understanding what level of service is going to be provided for what level of funding, and without having a governance system that holds whether it's one agency or multiple accountable to the taxpayer, to legislators, and so forth. And so that's what I would say is we can debate until we're blue about why RTA hasn't exercised their authority, or if they have that authority, or which agency had the same authority. At the end of the day, I just want it solved. And that's what we're going to roll up our sleeves and do.
Thank you. Audrey, CTA President Dorval Carter has said this isn't even a problem, that the real issue is money. And more specifically, the real issue is that CTA isn't getting its fair share of the current tax dollars. That all we got to do is rearrange the allocation of money, problem solved. Is he right?
Well, yeah, every transit agency is saying they want more money in the formula, right? And it's true, and Senator Villivalam already alluded to this too, that CTA has the largest amount of ridership in the region, and the funding they get is less than that. But at the same time, if we are going to be thinking at a regional level, to provide suburban transit, you have to subsidize it more. So there needs to be a balance. And I think what we really need to develop is a regional service plan to figure out where is the need for service greatest, based on population and income and where people are going, and to figure out what we need in terms of the service, and then figure out where the money flows to deliver that service, versus just picking numbers up front and then saying, now you have to live within your means.
It's come through in a lot in several of the questions that sort of another side of the issue of service is safety, that many people have experienced or are fearful of crime and are staying away from public transit as a result. How do we address that?
I can start by saying that, yeah, we're hearing that loud and clear. And the proposal, the MMA, actually, as I noted, includes transit ambassadors as a required element, because people want more presence and customer service when they're riding. The other piece is when you have more service and the buses and the trains come more frequently, people aren't standing around kind of feeling exposed, right? And they can just get on the bus. They can come right when the bus is coming and then be on their way. So we need to work on both the safety in the vehicles and in the stations, and also make sure that people aren't standing around waiting around as much. So it's very real, and it's a piece of it, but we need to do more than we're doing now.
Senator?
Kevin, if it's okay, I'll just add
Please.
that first and foremost, we need to acknowledge people's personal experiences when they have faced a safety issue on the CTA, Metro, or PACE, on public transit in general. Obviously, we look at the data, and the data has indicated the statistics show that it's trending downward. That being said, I wouldn't recommend, and I certainly won't to someone that has a personal experience, right? And so I think, but my point there is that it's both reality and perception. And so first, we know from our hearings, they spend at least $100 million on safety between the three agencies on a myriad of different solutions. Suffice to say, I don't believe it's working the way they intend. It's not achieving confidence, and it's not avoiding some of the safety issues that are occurring. And so my belief is that it needs to be centralized. This is one of those issues that needs to be centralized for a couple reasons. One is we need a regional approach. I believe we have a range of issues, right? We have some violent activity. The reality, though, the vast majority of the activity is homelessness, is some type of different nonviolent activity. And so I believe we need a system-wide approach that incorporates an officer, incorporates a social worker, maybe a co-responder model. We need to make sure that those resources are available for everyone. It's also a jurisdictional issue. When I give the example where my district is, where I live, if there's an incident at the Jefferson Park Blue Line station on the Blue Line, by the time that it's reported, and by the way it's reported, right now you have to press an intercom system, and everybody on the train can hear what you're saying, which is not exactly helpful if you're trying to report something while it's happening. But the reality is, by the time Chicago Police Department comes out, they could be in Rosemont, right? And then the Rosemont Police Department's coming out. And the question is, does Chicago Police Department have jurisdiction in Rosemont? Then you're draining resources from both police departments and so forth. So it needs to be a regional-wide approach that, again, is seamless. It's system-wide. It answers for both maybe mental health or other issues, and also any potential violence and so forth. And I think that creates a new perception, right? I'm not sure that CTA at this point is able to recover their perception of being able to keep the safety at a high level, or have the safety at a high level. So then having a new entity be in charge of that could give riders confidence. So those are just a couple of comments I would make as it relates to safety. And by the way, I think one of the best ways to help with safety is more riders, right? And so that's
Amen.
where you get into that cycle.
Virtuous cycle. More riders makes for safety. Senator Audrey, the two of you were on a fact-finding mission to Germany a few weeks ago to look at their transit systems. I'm curious. I mean, we could spend another hour talking about the German model, but I'm curious, sort of first impressions. What's the most important thing you learned there?
Thank you. I'll go first. I'll say number one, integration. Integration. Everything is integrated. They have, I think, 36 operators in Munich and 41 in Berlin. Obviously we have three, and so the reality is they were incredibly integrated, from every mode of transportation on public transit. I think for secondly, the frequency. I remember rushing to get a train one time, and one of the folks that we were with said, "Don't worry, they'll be here in 1 minute. There'll be another train in 1 minute. Why? No need to rush." And so that was obviously, a big takeaway. I think, obviously there's other items like cleanliness and so forth, but it was mainly the integration. And when I say integration, not just a concentrated quote unquote loop area, the entire system was integrated. In fact, there was an option to buy one fare for riding public transit in the entirety of Germany. So
Wow.
it's an opportunity and a vision that we can achieve with funding. The other piece was there is accountability, and it's interesting. I don't know that we can implement it here the same way, but because of the operators being quasi-private, essentially, um, they faced penalties. If they had major delays, they faced penalties. If they were on time and exceeded expectations, they also got incentives. But again, that speaks to the accountability, right? There's accountability there to achieve excellent service. So and then I'm sorry, last piece is just the what's possible, right? And people talk about the different modes of transportation being available, and that's part of why we're here and so forth. I would just note that Munich has more cars per household, the Munich area, than per 1,000 cars or 1,000 households, I should say, than the Chicago area, and has, I think, Audrey, it was like 3 or 4 times the ridership. That just gives you an example. Like everyone owns, like I have, there's parents like me that have two kids that need a car in Munich, but they make the conscious decision and they can because of the system to take the train more and the bus and so forth. So they still have a car. It's not that they don't have a car. They're still making the conscious decision to take public transit.
Thank you so much, Senator. Audrey, some final thoughts from you?
I mean, this is really about Germany or just in general?
Start with Germany.
Okay.
Then you can riff.
Well, I think the senator really covered it well, and I was very honored to be able to be included in that trip as well. There were 10 state legislators and 5 labor leaders and 5 advocates and 1 business leader that went on that trip together. I think one thing that stuck with me was that the transit agencies realize their competitor is the car and not each other. They know they'll get more riders if they work together. And they made a policy choice in the 70s. Well, yeah, actually even more recently, more like the 80s, 90s, to set up this governance structure. Their transit was not good 30 years ago. And they made a choice to set up these governance structures with transit associations and have proactively, progressively made it a lot better over 30 years. So it's like, we can do this. It just have to make a policy choice and stick with it. And we could have amazing transit within, a few decades. Sooner than that too, but the full build out.
Thank you. Any final last words from you, Senator?
This is going to sound repetitive, but it's I don't know that, and maybe Audrey can speak to it, but this is a once in a generation opportunity. I don't know when we're going to have this opportunity again. And we have a powerful coalition of business, labor, environment, good government groups, our everyday residents, people that are invested in a robust public transit system. Right now, we have some differing perspectives on governance. We all agree the service needs to be improved and expanded upon. And we're all going to be there, I believe, when it comes time to take the tough vote and support additional funding, increased funding, and via revenue. So I believe that's the case. I would just say for ELPC and other environmental groups, what I've heard consistently is how important the zero emissions piece of this. Whatever we do on public transit is going to be good for the environment, right?
Yes.
Any penny
Yes.
additional dollar that goes, it's one less, hopefully car or busload of folks on the train on the road. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we really truly want to achieve zero emissions buses, um, I I I challenge, people that say it costs too much. And I say, what's the cost if I'm taking my 6-year-old to walk behind a CTA bus? That's the cost to me, right? As a parent. And so we have a huge opportunity, but we're gonna have to fight like hell to make sure zero emissions is a reality. So I would just ask everybody on here to reach out to their legislator, ask them to sign on Senate Bill 5, and also specifically mention the zero emissions piece as well. Thank you.
I'll note in the chat, there's a link was just posted for an opportunity to tell your legislators how you feel about the importance of transit and some of the solutions we've talked about today. I've had a blast. We could enjoy talking together for another hour or two about this. There are a lot of issues we've just barely touched on, but unfortunately, we're running short of time. Audrey, Senator, I want to thank you both for joining us. Thank all of you in the audience for spending an hour with us. ELPC will continue to be an advocate for public transit and other climate solutions, and we'll be hosting future webinars on a variety of topics. So watch your email box for invitations there. And in answer to a couple of the questions came out, we will be sending a link to this so you can watch it again, so you can share it with your friends, and provide some links to some of the important resources that were provided in the chat. Thank you all for being with us. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.